You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
Welcome to the Choose FI Radio podcast. Today we're going to be speaking with what I could only consider two modern-day philosophers. As it happens, they're both from Canada, and as even more of a coincidence, they're both from the same city of Winnipeg. Now, for those of you who haven't already figured out who we're talking about today, we're going to be speaking with David Kane from Raptitude and Alan from freetopursue.com. I can't imagine two higher references than J.D. Roth and the Escape Artist, who frankly raved about them and said these are two individuals that you simply have to have on the podcast. And as you guys know, Brad and I have tried to go deeper and deeper with all these different topics, explore the basics of financial independence, explore the basics of happiness and mindfulness. But I think there's more here, and I can't imagine anyone better to help us go to that level too, to help us go deeper on the why than David and Alan. So to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, Jonathan. Yeah, this should be a really, really good treat here. Barney from The Escape Artist was on, and in his interview, he talked about his two favorite articles. They were actually two guest posts on his site. Interestingly enough, we received an email from David and Helene saying, hey, by the way, we live in the same city of Winnipeg, Canada, and we'd love to come on the show and talk to you about not only the articles Barney referenced, but just life optimization in general. And I'm using my own words here. This is what we've been talking about and where we've been moving Choose FI is to this pursuit of happiness, this pursuit of a better life. And yeah, this conversation should be wonderful. So with that, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So Alan, to bring this back full circle and really start at the beginning, one of the things that stood out so much to Barney over The Escape Artist was this article that you wrote. And essentially the reason that we're here is that you have a fake diamond ring. And one of the things that blew his mind is that this is something that he has always felt, but he felt that as a guy, it's not really something he could say. So to see you take this stance on it and really put together this beautiful article, to him was a long overdue conversation. And I thought it would be great just to maybe start with this particular article that you wrote. Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, absolutely. What is really funny is that I feel for you guys, because how do you possibly broach the subject of The Rock with your significant other? I mean, it can't be anything but a landmine. What I felt was important was to share the fact that the idea of a diamond ring is really a new concept. It was not been around for a long time, and it was really purely manufactured through marketing to try to make something that is relatively ordinary, extraordinary, and to attach to it a great deal of symbolism. If we go back only 70 years ago or so, closer to 80 now, it really wasn't a thing.
And Alan, when I was reading your article, I was frankly astonished. You don't exactly realize what a number has been done on a psyche or when marketing has totally overridden your common sense until someone just basically documents the progress. It's shocking how convinced we are that the diamond ring is a necessity in our life.
Exactly. And that can be a symbol, frankly, for a ton of stuff in our lives. There are a lot of things that we call needs that are far from.
And this is kind of one of these, it requires a mental reset. Even right now, someone may be struggling with this conversation. And it's not to tell you that you couldn't or shouldn't have a diamond ring, but just to think about it, just objectively for a second. And what I came away with is in an article is there is a product, a diamond that nobody feels any particular need to have at this particular point in time. And a company goes all in on turning it into a must-have, turning it into something that you can't live without. And to prove the point, they've won, they've beaten the game at this point. And to prove it out, when you drive down the road in your car, listening to terrestrial radio, as you go back and forth from your 9 to 5, you are going to hear 3 to 4 messages on that trip telling you that the only way to prove your 1 year, 5 year, and 10-year love is through a diamond.
Right, absolutely. And it's the societal pressure and the peer pressure and how you're going to appear to your significant other's family and your peers. I mean, the pressure is from all sides. It's been manufactured beautifully.
And we could honestly spend the entire podcast really breaking down the article. And honestly, when I was prepping for this particular episode, Aylin, I got just bogged down in the beauty of the content that you've put together, because I just felt, how do we not explore each one of these articles? And so I wouldn't be surprised if in the future you just started your own podcast, because the content that you've taken the time to put together is an important conversation in people's daily lives. And so I just love that this is where we could start, but I don't think we should finish here. David, I'd love to bring you into this conversation. And the article that really stood out to Barney on your website was a focus on happiness. And in particular, and I think it's appropriate and it's tied to what we just mentioned a second ago, it was this interview with a man. And I'd love for you to open up the conversation and tell us a little bit more about your thought process as you were putting that together.
Yeah. The article, the format of it is a mock interview where I interview the man, like the man who keeps you down, the head of the establishment. I just kind of set up a conversation that is supposed to lead the reader to a conclusion that even though there are people that are super highly privileged and have slanted the table in their direction, lobbyists and very powerful people, we sometimes use the existence of that unfairness as an excuse for becoming stagnant and not doing what we want with our lives. So even in like very affluent societies like the United States or Canada, and even if we're like kind of stuck in a middle class place, we still have incredible freedoms and privileges to shape our lives the way we want it. But because there is this element of unfairness there is the man, we sometimes convince ourselves and other people that we're not as mobile as we think we are in terms of creating the lifestyle that we want.
And there was this line in the article that you wrote that really stood out to me. And it's interesting, I guess, as a Canadian, that it's you that's pointing this out and noticing this. But I thought, as an American, I thought this phrase or this sentence was completely accurate. And you said, people in the U.S., more than anywhere else, respond to personal inadequacy by buying stuff or trying to get in a better position to buy stuff later. And this is, again, from the perspective of the quote unquote man trying to hold us down. This is great because buying stuff eventually creates disappointment, which creates more buying. That is the hamster wheel, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. Just in the word consumerism, the things that we buy, we're often just consuming, like we're using them up completely, yet we buy them with this idea that it's going to make us permanently better. Like if I get this new clothes, then that'll bump me up kind of in a permanent way. But to the powers that be, to the man, to people that own huge companies, they want us to consume things that keep us needing more later. So like everything we buy, it has a sense of novelty to it. It gives us a sense that we're advancing, we're moving on. But pretty much everything you buy, all of that wears off eventually. So we have to kind of look to other ways than buying things to kind of move up our quality of life.
David, one quote that stuck out to me was, I guess when you begin to believe someone else controls your life, you can stop worrying about it so much. And this just struck me as the perfect explanation of internal locus of control versus external locus of control. And in this case, you're saying most of society has this external locus of control where someone else, these powers that be, are controlling them, controlling society, whatever it may be. I'm curious your take on that. And I'm also curious if you've noticed a shift in your own life, if you ever had that external locus of control. And I obviously suspect very strongly it's changed to internal. But has there been any journey on your part?
Yeah, totally. I still think I'm very largely driven by an external locus of control. And I think if you could graph like my own kind of self-assessment of my quality of life at the same time as I graphed how well or how much my locus of control was internal, that they'd be kind of the same line. So like if you think of how good your life is, we often correlate it with things like how good our job is and how many material things we have. But I think it's more closely correlated with how determined we are to find those elements of joy and fulfillment in our own sphere of control, rather than finally getting able to like moving up and getting promotions and buying the bigger house and those things that are kind of governed by the externals. So yeah, there's been a journey on my part, but I haven't left the external locus of control behind by any means. I think it's quite innate in us and innate in society in how things are marketed. We're constantly being told that our life will get better if we just gain control of this thing we don't have control of yet, or purchase this thing we haven't purchased yet.
I think both of you in some way would say that you're writing about happiness. That may not be built into the name of your blog, but you're both analyzing the meaning of life and coming at it from slightly different perspectives and writing about it in slightly different ways. But I would love to get your take on, over the last several years, we've seen an exponential wave of bloggers writing about this exact topic. And I think people have a tendency to assume that quote unquote self-help bloggers have it all put together. And I'd love to hear, David, in particular, your thoughts. Why do you think that happiness is such a struggle? And why do you think that we see so many people documenting their journey?
Firstly, I think it's a question everybody has always been interested in some way. The most important philosophical question is how do we live? Like, how do we use our lives? The stakes are everything. The question of how to use your life. I mean, everything that you care about is summed up in that question. I started writing about this stuff because I wasn't good at it, like habit change and things like that. And I'm still not, like, I've learned so much, but I'm not a master at anything, like certainly not personal finance and certainly not habit change and self-discipline. So yeah, I write about it because at least I used to be really bad at a lot of this stuff and I still am not great at it. But I think that's true for everybody. I think we struggle. I think the source of our struggle is kind of a conflict between what we want and what our instincts and our evolutionary impulses want. We don't want to eat too much, but we also want to eat too much. Like, we have impulses to consume a lot and secure a lot of resources and worry about what people think of us. And that conflicts with our desires for self-actualization and confidence and things like that. So I think it's a struggle in some way for everybody to be happy, because the goals that the forces that drive us are geared towards survival and not happiness. But happiness is a possibility for us, yet we're still fighting with these ancient impulses to avoid everything that's unpleasant and grasp at everything that is pleasant.
David, do you think, even in terms of, let's say, self-help, and I hate that terminology necessarily, but do you think that we can consume too much? I find that I'm taking in so much content, and ostensibly it's good content. I'm trying to get better, but I feel overwhelmed. And I then kind of get on myself about not keeping up with particular habits. And I'm curious if you've found that in your life and what your thoughts are.
By consume too much, do you mean consume too much media or just?
So I would say, good question. I would say try to take in too many quote unquote positive habit changes at once, and it almost being overwhelming.
Yeah, totally. I think that we tend to do that. What we perceive as our shortcomings tend to come to mind a lot because they're painful. If you feel like you're not good enough at this and not good enough at that, you tend to think about it and ruminate it. So if you're thinking about self-help or self-improvement, you tend to want to fix everything at once. And I know I've fallen into this cycle often of being like, you get fed up with something, you have a week that doesn't go very well, and then you think, okay, starting Monday, I'm going to eat right, I'm going to save money, I'm going to work on this project. And you think that you can just kind of snap out of it. And that, I think that's a natural tendency, but it's so hard to make progress with it because it is really hard to, like, as the phrase goes, move the needle with any one particular thing. It's hard enough to do it when you're just doing it alone, but all of our shortcomings come at us at once, and we often try and just take on too much.
Ellen, I wanted to get you in here as well. Barney from The Escape Artist described you as having an enormous amount of mental strength. He was actually curious and wanted me to ask you, where do you think that comes from? Have you found mental strength throughout your life, or has it been a process that you've improved on in past years or even potentially 10, 15 years? Does that resonate with you, I guess?
That's going to be a mystery of an answer for me as much as for anyone else. I would say that I like doing things that push me beyond my comfort zone. The constant push against my comfort zone is something that I really appreciate because of the fact that it pays you back tenfold. What I mean by that is that once you've pushed your comfort zone, it never goes back because no one can ever take away the fact that you did something. And so multiple times a year, I will try and do something that I've never done before that I'm frankly not sure if I'm going to finish. But somehow once I've made the commitment, I usually just follow through. So the interesting thing about comfort zones is that when you expand your personal comfort zone in one area, it enables you more easily to expand your comfort zone in another area because you are comfortable with becoming uncomfortable. And it also reduces our risk aversion. So when I do something, for example, in the physical realm, like run a marathon, it may make me more likely to do something else that scares me, like speak in front of a large group or ask someone out on a date or something like that. So once you literally get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And the really weird part is you can actually end up craving it because you realize that that's part of how you grow as a person.
You know, what's amazing about what you just said is this is the exact opposite of hedonic adaptation. If hedonic adaptation is getting used to taking the path of least resistance and just enjoying your comforts and always raising whatever it is, that next thing that you need in order to maintain that level of comfort, this is the exact opposite of that. I think that's very interesting because I know for you, basically starting from day one, you laid in place the burger flipping rule. And I'd love to hear about that.
It's really what got me on my path to financial independence. It starts a little bit earlier than that. So the burger flipping rule is based on a movie from 1999 called American Beauty. And there were indeed two other movies that year. It must have been just the turn of the century that caused this. There were two other movies that year, and probably more, that were fundamentally changing my perception of the world. The other two were Fight Club and The Matrix. The one that I was relating to specifically at that time when I basically came up with the burger flipping rule for myself, kind of a rule for myself, was the main character, Lester, is at a job he hates. He can't stand his boss, who's a real jerk. And he decides to take, at that time, a severance and figures he's going to fix part of his life. And one of the parts is that he's going to take a job that he really wants and really would like. And that is to have the least amount of responsibility possible and start flipping burgers for a living. And so that's where the burger flipping rule came for me. And it was this idea that I wanted to have the freedom in life to flip burgers for a living if I wanted to. And that came from that movie, and at the same time having, within 2 years of that movie, a bad work experience where it was just a really bad work environment. And I ended up leaving after a year. And I vowed never, ever, ever to let myself be under somebody's thumb again.
Ellen, I'm curious, just to go back for a minute, about that leaning into discomfort. That was just such a powerful concept for me. And I really just wanted to ask about it because I've recently come across this concept where I look for these areas and I find anywhere that I'm feeling nervous about something or get sweaty palms or whatever it may be. You talked about like public speaking. I recently got asked to speak at a local university, and my initial thought was, oh no, I could never do that. That's the old me, the old script just taking over. What I said was, all right, this is a perfect opportunity to grow and to lean into. So that's something that I'm now moving towards. And I'm curious if you could give any examples recently of instances where you might have been previously frightened or might not wanted to have leaned into it, and where you have actually moved towards it and gained something positive from it.
I can give you an example that's very real and raw for me right now. I decided this year that I was going to start a YouTube channel. To be fair, two YouTube channels, one more on the fun side and one that is more educational and instructive, where trying to reach an audience that may not be big into reading, but that will listen. So some people listen to podcasts, some people listen and watch YouTube videos. But what I'm finding interesting is I'm realizing that a lot of people also just listen to YouTube videos, almost like background. And so I thought that would be the medium that I would try. And the funny thing is, talk about differences in comfort zone. I can go in front of hundreds of people and deliver a presentation No big deal, no sweat, not really much anxiety at the beginning. I'm always prepped. I get one-on-one into a space with a camera and I freeze. So I decided that that was a very good challenge for me this year to start doing video and posting them for the world to see. And it is still scaring the heck out of me, but I'm going to do it.
It does go back to stretching your comfort zone. I love how when you do it in one area, you start to see the benefits in other areas of your life. And it's not a stretch to imagine. Now you're kind of doing this in reverse where you're a public speaker now focusing on a YouTube channel. But I can tell you from my perspective, doing a podcast, week in and week out, it makes me a better public speaker, I would imagine. And now the idea of being a public speaker is much less frightening to me than it would have been 1 or 2 years ago. I think if we had a Venn diagram in front of us, we've talked a little bit about pushing yourself in your comfort zones. We've talked a little bit about suppressing or removing yourself from hedonic adaptation. But I think another piece of this Venn diagram would have to be self-control. And David, I know that's something that you have spent so much time talking about. And I'd love to get your thoughts on this idea of self-control and how that enters your own personal framework.
Well, self-control is kind of the holy grail of the pursuit of the good life, right? Like if we could only just get ourselves to do the things that we thought made sense, like to eat right and exercise. But it's amazing how hard it is to have control over yourself. You think that the hard thing would be to control other people, and of course it is, but we're a creature that generally can't even fulfill our own New Year's resolutions. So it's like a constant battle to learn how to get yourself to do the thing that makes the most sense. So I think that for me, the crux of self-control is realizing the kind of conflicting desires that we have about any given thing. Like to use the example of eating right. We want to be thin and fit and live for a long time, but we also want donuts. And so those two things conflict and we want them both. So many of the articles I've written, they come back to some kind of way of looking at your own ability to control yourself and to get yourself to do the thing that makes sense. So I think it permeates all of these self-improvement topics, this idea of self-control.
So you've written about this. You've written several articles about this particular topic. Do you have any actionable takeaways or any light bulb moments that you've had as you've explored this idea of self-control?
Well, one recent one, I wrote an article. I can't remember what it was called, but I think it was called The Art of Self-Control. Not that I'm a master at it or anything, but the trick was to notice patterns that you take in your daily routine and just put up some kind of very small but significant enough barrier that makes it a little bit less easy to do the thing you're trying to avoid doing. So the example I used in the article was I had this habit of trying to sneak in a late coffee in the afternoon, like at 3 or 4 p.m. to give me a little bit more energy to work. But whenever I do that, I know that I'm risking disruption to my sleep, like risking a sleepless night. So what I did was I just put this tiny little barrier in it where I took the little tray from the coffee grinder, the piece of plastic the coffee grounds fall into, and after lunch coffee, which is at 1 o'clock, should be my cutoff point, I took that and I just put it in the sink with the dirty dishes. After I do that, I'm not going to go into the sink and take this kind of dirty piece of plastic that's sitting with like unwashed forks and put it back in there and make coffee. Not that I couldn't do it, but it was just enough of a barrier. I called it a velvet rope, like sort of a symbolic barrier between yourself and the thing that you want to avoid doing. And so I find that often that's enough. Another one is trying to not use your smartphone as much. I would have my smartphone on my desk as I worked and I'd get stuck writing and I'd pick up my phone, And I found that just a tiny little barrier would be to put the phone just out of reach. So I actually have to stand up. I put it on a shelf or something like that. It's not an actual barrier. I could always just grab it if I wanted to, but it's just adding a little bit of difficulty in that path that you don't want to take. So that's such a helpful trick. It's easy to identify just some little velvet rope kind of barrier you can put between yourself and the thing you're trying to refrain from doing.
It is amazing how these little mental hacks can make all the difference, both in taking things away and also putting things in. I've read multiple times about exercising. If you want to get up in the morning and exercise, well, sometimes it's pretty easy just to stay in that nice, cozy bed. But if you see your exercise clothes and your shoes laid out right at the foot of your bed, you're going to get up and you're going to exercise. And it's just that tiny little tweak that can make all the difference in the world. And I'm curious, have you seen that on the opposite? Have you used this little mental hack to add anything positive to your life?
Yeah, totally. Like, I guess the other side of the velvet rope technique is what I'd call the red carpet technique, which is you just take difficulty away from the path that you do want to take. So like in the morning, if you have to tackle this difficult thing that you've been avoiding, like you've got to prepare a presentation or something like that, and you've been avoiding working on it, what could you do today to make it just a little bit easier? Clean off your desk of distractions, for example. But what I often do is I think about how the morning will go and where I'm going to go, like make coffee, come to my desk. The only thing that will be on my desk is a very, very clear list of steps. Like the first thing is to do this. The second thing is to do that. So I call that red carpeting, where you just make the easiest, most inviting possible path to the difficult thing that you're trying to get yourself to do. And it's kind of the exact opposite of the velvet rope technique. And it works together sort of thematically, like the metaphor works together, velvet ropes and red carpets.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Do you break those tasks down into those minute little details, or is it just really the first one or two just to get that mental ball rolling?
It's mostly just those first things. Just writing down literally number one, open up Microsoft Word if you have to type something up. So much of the resistance to doing the things that are difficult for us is at the beginning. It's kind of psychological. I find that it drops off really quickly, the resistance that we have. So the easier you make it to get past that first couple of minutes, really, of something difficult, the easier it is to get to that part where you're on the downslope and you've got a bit of momentum and the hard part is behind you.
You know what you guys have really latched on to is this idea of convenience and how it really is a double-edged sword. Helene, I'd love to get your thoughts, in particular, talking about the negative aspects of convenience and how it really ends up being the enemy of self-control. Could you speak to that just for a few minutes?
Oh, convenience. Let me count the ways. We live in a world that we don't even notice the convenience. And it's really unfortunate because some of the biggest sources of convenience are absolutely life-altering. Let me give you one example. Potable water right at the sink. That was such a game changer when it became a reality for urban centers. And we don't even think about it. So just that one thing in our lives changes our required behavior and habits for any given day. So that is just one example. Everywhere we look, we have convenience. The fact that we have a thermostat is a major convenience. We don't have to go and find our fuel on a regular basis to heat our homes or cool our homes, for that matter, with electricity. So a lot of this convenience, if you start adding in all the products and services that you and I use every single day, if we were to start to add up the amount of time in a given day, and even more important, the amount of physical and mental energy required to recreate what we have on a given day, it would fill up our entire day. So with that, a couple of bad things happen. You talked about hedonic adaptation earlier. It makes us very dismissive of just how lucky we are, first off, and gives us a sense of entitlement. But also, it stops us from understanding that physical and mental expenditure to get through our day is normal. And the way we're living now is abnormal. For example, in my own life, I will make a point of including some inconvenience. So my husband and I don't eat out very often, if at all. It's very rare. We will walk to different places that are reasonably nearby, an hour or less, and make a point of doing that despite the fact that we have a couple of sets of wheels in our driveway. And we'll use the bike a lot. When I went, I took a 4-month sabbatical to go back to school away from my corporate job. And that whole winter, now we're in Winterpeg here, I used my bike. I had a 25-minute commute and used my bike to go to school every day. Those things, when you come back to what is the norm, you feel like king and queen.
Yeah, as you're describing that, I'm thinking about this sense of a real wonder that's lost when we just sleepwalk through life and we don't even take a step back and say, how amazing are all these conveniences? And I'm curious, does this practice of paying more attention to these conveniences, does it help you become more grateful in life? Do you find there's an impact on your happiness from focusing on these amazing little things that are really spread by the hundreds throughout our life?
So reducing the conveniences that we have has definitely has an impact on outlook and on gratitude in general. And by noticing, as opposed to not realizing all the benefits that we have day in and day out, by noticing them, first off, you can't help but be grateful because you're noticing. And a big part of gratitude is to notice the stuff that's going well in your life or that you're thankful for. And so to put on the gratitude glasses, I guess, is the way I would see it, is you're really taking in all that is available to you. And it makes every day so much better. And I also find that when I have an insult to my person or to my body, I am also more patient with it because I realize that it's a drop in the bucket when I consider everything else that's going right. And even though something small, something negative can really pick at you, it has a whole lot less hold on you if you're not zeroing in on that one thing and you keep the broader view in mind.
Helene, I'd love to bring this back full circle to talk about the FI community and to some degree talk about how these concepts that we're hitting on right now are kind of like a superpower on the path to FI. And in particular, I'm thinking about this article you wrote called Lion or Lamb, and it's this idea of being or not being susceptible to marketing. And I'd love to hear you unpack that.
Oh, wow. That was quite an experience. I've written about this twice, and I think the one you're talking about was the marketing pitch that we attended somewhat of a, I guess you could call it a mini conference, a half a day. Well, it was, pardon me, it was supposed to be a full day, basically being pitched at as a success seminar of some sort. Here's the thing. When you kind of have your life sorted out, you're not desperate for a solution. You know what you're doing, you know the direction you're headed toward, and you're not looking externally for someone to fix your problem, for someone to have the miracle pill, the miracle drug, the miracle process. You're somewhat self-sufficient in going out and seeking logical, reasonable, rational ways of improving your life. And what I was able to witness that morning, because I did not stay for the full day, it was more of a people watcher exercise, because I had a feeling about what the atmosphere was going to be. And it was heavy sales in books and courses and whatnot. So there was a speaker coming up at this seminar every half hour to 45 minutes, and they were selling
beat the stock market software. And
yes, and you can have, I saw the cars in the parking lot. You can have a beautiful brand new car. Just listen to us. We will make you successful. We will make you happy. We will make you the best version of you that you can be. And of course, everything after each hour in the seminar, there was something being sold, and for a limited time. And you could only get it today at this conference or this seminar. David and I were sitting next to each other and just watching in awe the flocking to these tables at the end of each speaker's delivery, and could not believe how desperate people were for a quick solution, a get-rich-quick solution, a solution to help with various aspects of personal psychology. It was almost Jerry Springer-like. It was beyond absurd. I think the more you become self-sufficient in mind, body, and wallet, the less susceptible you are to become one of those lambs. You really become a lion in the way that there's no fright about feeling a sense of security. And because there's no fright and this need to have knee-jerk reactions, you become a lion in that you observe, you're calm, and you know what it is that you want, and you'll go after it. You don't need someone to tell you what you need.
As you're describing that, I'm thinking about how people are fooled by complexity. I'm not sure why this jumped to my mind originally, but it's so easy to bog people down with details and these magic quick fixes that are just the secret sauce. I've found in my life that I crave simplicity, and every satisfactory answer that I've found of late is when I can break things down to their simplest essence. And I'm curious if either of you have any thoughts on that, on complexity versus simplicity in life?
Well, yeah, you mentioned before, like, we often run into this problem of trying to improve too many things at once. And so we can see life as this big, complex network of interconnected factors, and we have to get just the right balance. And so I find that when I make progress at anything, it's because I've understood it on a simpler level than I used to. Just a daily routine down to like a couple of phases instead of a really complex thing, something like that. So yeah, I think that the better an understanding you have of what works and what doesn't correlates with how simply you can break it down and how simply you could explain it to someone else or to yourself.
And Aylin, one of the things that really stood out to me was actually you quoted J.L. Collins, who we're obviously huge fans of here, but you had this quote at the bottom basically saying, "I may not have owned a Mercedes, but I own my freedom," a quote from The Simple Path to Wealth. But it strikes me that you're talking about a fiscal peace of mind. And I know at the bottom of that article, you talked a little bit about this idea of simplicity and also, what is the antidote? What is the fix for being a lamb? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, definitely starting off with having some security of person. And that's very different for every person. So in some cases, and scarcity can come from all directions. The one that tends to be common across people is fiscal scarcity. So a lack of money, or at least a perceived lack of money, but it could be relationships, it could be anything else. And the thing that marketers tend to go after is this sense of scarcity in some part of your life. Now, it happened to be that seminar was a fiscal scarcity, so lack of money. By having a strong foundation in handling your own personal finances, you are not coming at it from an emotional perspective because you have your bases covered there. And because you are not feeling a sense of scarcity, which actually affects our ability to think and process and to think critically, you can see the blinders are not on. You see what's going on in front of you. You can see the intention of someone trying to sell you a solution, a product or service. And so it's easier for you to spot a scammer. You can easily smell a rat and find those people who are not after a win-win situation, who are frankly out to fleece you, and feeding off of that need for you to feel a sense of security. And you also have an opportunity to listen to how you feel about something as opposed to letting your adrenaline drive your behavior. So you can start listening more to your gut and say, this sounds too good to be true, or this is an obvious scam, or this person doesn't have my best interests in mind. And you can walk away unscathed. And that is priceless.
Yeah, I mean, people feel like they're going to miss out. And I think that's part of, like, for me, it's, I need to understand something. So the perfect example, as you're describing this, I'm thinking back almost instantly to this episode in my life where I had a insurance salesman come to the house, and I just wanted simple term life insurance. And he's trying to sell me on this absurd variable universal life program. And he's sitting there, and I just let him talk. And he talked for 2 hours, and I just kept peppering him with questions, and he couldn't answer it in any satisfactory manner because it was so convoluted. He didn't understand it. He couldn't explain it. And I'm sure many people would say, oh, that sounds great, right? Like they would just accept it because, okay, this sounds like some can't miss financial product that here's this salesman coming in as an expert. But for me, I need to understand something at its simplest essence. So it's funny how that all ties together exactly here. And your smell a rat and trust your gut feeling. I love that.
And that awareness is what led me to fire an advisor. I could not believe that some of what he was telling me was that folks were falling for it. And I felt bad for anyone who was going to sign up with this guy, because he definitely did not have the client's interest in mind. And I didn't realize in speaking with him how lucky I had been with my previous financial advisor. And there are great people out there. And it's really nice when we can tell the difference between someone who's looking for a win-win with their clients or customers and someone who's really one-sided.
This is interesting that, David, I know you would not consider yourself a financial blogger, but at the same time, I know that you're very popular in the financial blogging community. You were first referred to me by JD Roth, who raves about you. I mean, he has told me multiple times that you are his favorite writer. I know that Mr. Money Mustache is a huge fan of your content, and ESI is a huge fan of your content. I guess I would be curious, just from your perspective, why do you think this is? What are you offering the financial independence community that maybe some of the other money bloggers aren't really hitting on?
I'm not sure exactly. I think because I blog on such a broad topic, like I blog about human life, basically, which necessarily includes money, but I'm certainly no authority on personal finance. I end up kind of crossing over into other niches. And I think just by happenstance, I sort of have, at least my audience has crossed over into the financial space. Mr. Money Mustache, for example, is ostensibly writes about personal finance, but it's really about quality of life, which is what I write about. It's really about what decisions do you make that can create the life you want. And he talks about the financial end of it, and I talk about every end of it that I can think of. So I think, once you're exposed to another audience, they start talking about you, and then other people in that space come over. So I'm also not any kind of authority on fitness at all. My fitness, it's a fairly modest role in my life, but because I've written about it and it's been played around in the fitness niche, I get longtime people who are fitness people, and then they link to me and things like that. So I think that's kind of the explanation. But more on a broader level, we're all sort of talking about the same thing. We're talking about how to make your life better, and just dealing with it in sometimes more specific aspects like money and sometimes more general aspects.
I have a couple extra questions to add on to that. I actually went to JD as I knew this interview was coming up, and I asked him, if you could ask David any, single or several questions, what questions would you have for him? And he gave me actually a lot. He has a lot of questions for you. I wish I could have brought him on this call, but I'm going to read a question that he put together for me, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. He says, you've been writing at Raptitude for 9 years now. How has blogging changed in that time? What have you learned personally from the past 9 years, and what opportunities have come from it? What's been the most rewarding, the most challenging? And then as a final question, I know this is a lot, what articles that you've written have been the most important for you in your practice? So I don't think you could probably hit on all of that, but I'd love to just, as you put all that together, get maybe your thoughts generally.
Yeah, it's hard to know what's changed because I've only had one blog, so I've only seen it through this one perspective. When I started in 2009, one thing that has changed. When I started in 2009, there were a lot of single author blogs. I mean, there still are millions and millions, but the focus has kind of shifted over the last 10 years from single author blogs talking about one thing through their own personality and their own personal experience to bigger sites and not even multi-author blogs, but huge sites like BuzzFeed and things like that. I think those bigger aggregate sites have captured more and more attention. So I'm guessing if you're starting a blog today, a personal blog, it's a lot harder to kind of gain a foothold in the blogging world. That's a change that I've perceived. For the other parts of the question, the most rewarding part of the whole experience has been connecting with readers on an individual basis. I'll publish an article and it might do really well, and I'll see the numbers, how many people share it or how well it does. And that's always exciting, but much more fulfilling is when somebody emails me and said, yes, you put this exactly how I needed to hear it. And so that's for sure been the most rewarding part. And because it's been happening for so long, I have all these there's kind of these unique online relationships with people who've been reading for years. I don't know much about them, but I know that they struggle with a particular thing I struggle with. And so that kind of connection has been infinitely rewarding.
There was one point that JD made that I thought was really, really pertinent to this conversation. And he said that more than any other website that I've ever read, Raptitude rewards careful reading from article 1, and it builds on itself. I thought that was incredible. And as a side note to that, I'd be curious from your perspective, now that you're several hundred articles in over, the last close to a decade, which articles have really meant the most to you personally?
That's a good question. Often when I write about something, I'm writing about what's on my mind right there. And quite often I'm thinking about the issue as I write it because I need to put it into a way that's understandable by other people. I have thoughts all day long, obviously, but they're not coherent in my head. I have to get them onto paper so that I kind of know what I think about something. So I'll think about something for long enough to write an article about it, and then I'll move on to something else. But quite often there's a permanent effect that it has on the way I deal with something. Like I'll come up with a kind of aphorism or a rule of thumb in dealing with this issue that I recall when it comes up again. So I don't often go back to reread them. There aren't that many articles that I'm perfectly happy with. I guess that's kind of common to all writers. Yeah. So when people ask me for a favorite, I don't really know. Like I don't really have a particular one. It's usually like situational, like when I'm doing something, when I'm in the, I wrote an article about, Helene taught me the pause squat, where you're doing like a barbell squat, but you pause at the bottom. And I wrote an article about that as like a metaphor for getting comfortable with discomfort, which we talked about earlier. In the hole, the bottom of the squat is this really difficult part. So if you spend more time there, you adjust to what it feels like to be in this difficult part. So that sort of concept would come to me when I get into the gym and I put my hands on the bar and there's those psychological cues to think about things. But just off the top of my head, it's hard to like come back to something conceptual. I kind of need real life to sort of remind me of the idea.
David, I love that article, and I wanted to point it out in particular. It's called The Art of the Hard Part, and I definitely recommend everyone in the audience to listen to that. And just to tell you personally, I read that article, I internalized it, and I actually went out and I know that was a metaphor in general for life, but about leaning into difficult things, but I actually did those pause squats. And you're right, it was amazing. Wow, you're at the bottom and everything is screaming, get out of here, but just lean into the discomfort. So that definitely had a direct impact on me. I'm curious. So obviously you're describing the way that you're writing as a way to tackle these subjects that are difficult parts of your life or things that you want to understand better. I'm curious if there are any particular subjects that you desperately want to explore in 2018 and beyond, things that are maybe vexing you, that are issues in your life that you do want to overcome, that you still need to explore both mentally and then by writing about them.
Well, my theme for this year is I wrote an article a couple of months ago called Go Deeper, Not Wider. And it was basically, I was proposing this hypothetical tradition where everybody, when they get maybe into their 30s and their living situation is established and the career is established, that they take a year and they don't do anything new. You don't start any new projects that you don't need to. You read the books you've already purchased. You develop skills you've already had rather than starting new ones. You don't start any new hobbies. And so I wrote about this idea, this hypothetical tradition of the depth year as kind of a commentary on consumerism and how we're so quickly grasping at new things, starting new things all the time that we never finish. And the response was so huge to that article that people were saying, I'm going to do that this year in 2018, because this article came out in December. In 2018, I'm going to do this depth year. I'm not going to do anything new. I'm just going to develop what I've already started. The things where you get to the hard part and you quit because there's something new and it's easier. So the people that responded to that post inspired me to actually do that and not just treat it as kind of a metaphor, but to take a year and just develop certain areas to a higher level rather than expand to new areas. So the areas that I've chosen, I'm going to develop my meditation practice more deeply. I'm going to just consistently stick to a fitness program. Like I kind of jump around and I kind of go wider and not deeper in that respect. And I'm going to develop the relationships I already have. Like rather than constantly trying to meet new people, I'm going to go, I know a lot of amazing people already. I'm going to take a more proactive role in developing those relationships. So right now, like what I'm working on is just all the areas that I tend to go no deeper in. I'm going to go deeper. I'm going to get better and confront the difficult parts and just see what that's like.
So, Lynn, I think many of us tend to benchmark our progress-defy based on a number. I know that Mr. 1500 absolutely had a number in mind that he was achieving. And once he reached it, he hit financial independence. Root of Good, similar, had a number that he was tracking until he reached it. I know that in your case, you had been doing updates for the last couple of years. And I noticed that in the fall of last year, the updates stopped. I'd be curious to get your thoughts on the $1 million to-do list.
So the $1 million is just that number that we hear on a regular basis. I think it's just, it's a milestone that not only personal finance bloggers, but people in general, $1 million seems to be an attractive number. And I think it's just because the dial moves over to 7 figures at that point. I had first seen it from Jay Money, who had the what he coined the $1 Million Club. What he was doing was inviting personal finance bloggers to offer what they were doing to help them get to $1 million of net worth. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. It's a great way to get people reading Free to Pursue to understand what my behavior is in saving and to declare it without somewhat cryptically, just offering as much information as needed to say what it is that we're doing. And one big part is saving over 50% of our income relatively effortlessly. By doing that, I spent a couple of years updating the behavior with against the goals I had and goals for behavior. And then essentially what happened was after 2 years of updates, I realized, well, there's no point in updating a $1 Million Club to-do list if you're there. So I just added and no further updates needed, I guess, on that list. So crossing that threshold is a nice check mark. And I'm also really surprised, though, at how it's kind of anticlimactic. It's almost like the climb on the mountain is always more interesting than reaching the peak sometimes.
Or the journey matters, right?
The journey matters. I mean, just like Persig in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance talks about that a great deal, is that the journey, if you don't pay attention to the journey and you only focus on the destination, you kind of miss the point.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think so many people, unfortunately, do get overwhelmed by the nuts and bolts of saving money or trying to get to FI, and they're not worried about the path, and they're also not worried about their own happiness. And then to me, it's, okay, what happens when you get there? What kind of shell of a life are you going to have if the only thing you've been focusing on is now gone, essentially? So theoretically, you're at FI and it should be wonderful, but what do you have if you have not been focusing on what lights you up, what makes you happy in life?
Yeah, and so what happened was when we did end up over that threshold, my husband and I looked at each other and we said, okay, well, what are we doing? The answer back was, and I have to admit, for about 6 months, because I'm the spender out of the two of us, I loosened up a little bit. And I have to tell you, it didn't feel good. And it's not because of the lower amount of savings going into investments and such. It was just because we were bringing in more into our lives that didn't, it's like diminishing returns. The more that we were bringing in really wasn't serving us all that much more or well. And so if anything, after this realization, we are living our lives exactly like we were before. Nothing has changed. And we're realizing that we're perfectly content moving forward just as we have.
Yeah, I think that's really important to figure out where your comfort zone really lies. I know we've had a bunch of guests here who, like the mad scientist, for instance, Brandon said he got into this deprivation mindset and he was just extraordinarily unhappy. And then he actually went the opposite way, which was trying to essentially spend as much as they possibly could. And it wound up, that difference was only like $5,000 extra a year. But he found that actually did impact his happiness positively. So that was worth it. So I guess what my advice to the audience would be is explore the boundaries there. And it's usually not that large of a difference in terms of dollars. And you can figure out, like in your case, that was not money well spent, but in Brandon's case, it was. So it's fascinating to look at it like that. And David, I just wanted to throw it over to you. I know, obviously, you're not a personal finance or a financial independence blogger, but since you have become more aware of this community, as many of the big names in the community follow you, and presumably you've got to know them on some level, have the tenets of financial independence impacted your life in any way? Like, has this been something that's changed in your life?
Yeah, totally. Like, FI is not a huge goal of mine. Like, the number one bucket list item for me was to make a living doing work that I love. And I've achieved that now. So now I guess the next phase is what to do with that living. So I found a pivotal part in achieving that goal of just being able to change careers to what I like and become my own boss was discovering the FI community. And that happened through Mr. Money Mustache, who I hadn't heard of at the time. It was just in my Twitter notifications. He's like, I found this blog, Raptitude. I like it. And so I explored his site that night, and I learned so much about, just in the one day, the connection between money and happiness, and then more specific things like savings rate and investment. And so saving the way that he describes and anyone in the FI community describes is what allowed me to create enough of a cushion to change careers. Because I had a day job at the time, and it was a fine job, but it wasn't fulfilling to me, and it didn't have anything to do with what I truly care about. But that was essential information for me to be able to actually make that switch. And then since then, I've met all these people. I've gone to FinCon twice, even though I'm not a financial blogger. And so I know I'm in the community, even though I'm not someone to come to for financial advice.
It sounds like we actually have a very similar path. The FI community was directly responsible for me being able to make a fully funded lifestyle change as well. So I absolutely love just your perspective on this. Now, normally that would be the end of the interview, but on this show, we'd love to give you guys a chance to tackle the hot seat. Are you ready for this?
Sure.
Okie dokie.
In a world drowning in debt and rampant consumption, trapped by the chains of lifestyle inflation, these questions highlight the secrets of those who have broken free. Welcome to the Choose FI Hot Seat.
All right, Ellen, question number 1, your favorite blog that's not your own.
Can I cheat and give 2?
You bet. Give as many as you want.
My absolute favorite when it comes to personal finance matters is Frugal Fringe. And Frugal Fringe is because the author, his name is A. Noonan Moose, anonymous. He has a bunch of amazing calculators on his blog. Checklists and calculators is what he's kind of known for. And I just love his stuff. And then the other one is one that is more on taking care of yourself. And that's Humans Are Not Broken by Angelo Coppola. He stopped writing on that blog in 2016, but all of his content is pretty timeless. I love the name. I love the fact that he wants to focus on the fact that no matter what marketers tell us, we're just fine. We can optimize our lives.
That is fascinating. I have not heard of either of those, and I certainly have my homework for this week to go explore those two sites. So thanks for sharing. David, what about you? Favorite blog that's not your own?
It's still probably Seth Godin's blog. I think he's been doing it for longer than anybody else. I don't know anybody who's been blogging consistently for it's like 20 years now. And it's so concise. Like, he just gets right to the point, or he really just shares the point and then any supporting points for it. I just think it's fantastic. And I mean, it's mostly about marketing, but like we've been talking about, all of these topics apply to much larger topics, like why we do what we do and what makes human beings tick, what makes us make decisions. And he really gets to that through the angle of marketing.
I'm constantly amazed at how often he publishes as well. It's an amazing output, and I'm on his email list as well. And yeah, love getting those emails. So, yep, completely agreed there. All right, question number 2, David. We'll start with you. Your favorite article of all time?
There's an article on Steve Pavlina's blog, one that was hugely influential to me, and I think is probably the most popular article on his blog, was called 10 Reasons Why You Should Never Get a Job. And he basically makes the case for how disadvantageous it is to work for somebody else. Like, he had a job for like one day and quit immediately. And then since then, he's been an entrepreneur. And he just kind of makes the case for entrepreneurship. And as soon as I read that, I was totally convinced. I'm not someone who, I quit easily at things. But as soon as I developed the goal to work for myself, and it came the day I read that article, I knew I was going to do that. So that was hugely influential, and it changed my life.
And does he write at a blog with the same name?
Yeah, stevepavlina.com.
Awesome. And Helene, same question to you. Your favorite article of all time, and this can be one that you wrote or someone else's.
I'm a bad personal finance blogger because I don't read very many articles. I read a ton of books, though. Can I make a book recommendation?
Please. I've actually been enjoying your book recommendations.
Oh, fantastic. So getting a sense from your audience, I'm going to say that the book called Happy Money by Elizabeth Dunn and Michael Norton is fantastic. Talk about optimizing your dollars. It talks about what you want to spend your money on that is most highly correlated with living a happy life. And spoiler alert, it is not conventional.
All right. Don't tell us any more. We'll have it in the show notes. Question number 3, Helene, your favorite life hack.
So this is one that I'm increasingly learning, and that is put your wishes out into the world, because people do want to help other people, but they can't help if they don't know what you want. And so I've had many instances of that over 2017 and into 2018. And it really is amazing. We need to share what our vision is. We need to share what it is that we want in life.
On a practical basis, like, how are you going about that? Like, are you literally telling your friends and family, or is it through your writing? Or tell us more. I'm curious.
Okay, I gave David an example this morning as we were chatting before we connected with you guys. There was an invitation from a personal finance blogger for dog sitting at her home in Guatemala, and it was for November. Just on a whim, I said, hey, we can't possibly take you up on it in November, but hey, do you need anybody to dog sit in March, April? Guatemala's on our list of travel, and we'd like to go. And she said, well, as a matter of fact, yeah, end of March, early April would work. That's great. If I hadn't asked the question, put that wish forward, I would not have this opportunity.
And it's amazing, Helene, that we have seen that over and over again. And I'm not sure if it's because of the particular community that we're in, or maybe if it's because we just aren't dreaming big enough to begin with. But I can certainly tell you that over the last 2 years, I have been amazed at the truth of that statement. David, your favorite life hack?
Aside from the velvet rope / red carpet trick I was talking about earlier, what I found incredibly useful is when you want to change something, like some kind of habit change that is trackable, like spending, for example, or caloric intake, or like the number of hours worked on a particular project. I find that what we tend to do is we set an arbitrary goal and then we try and meet it, and it's always really hard. I found that if you just track how you're doing for a little while without trying to change how you're doing, just track where the dollars go or how many calories you intake, and just get that information first and commit to that tiny goal of just tracking it. It gives you so much information that makes it easy to actually make a change by the time you want to make a change. So like, I call it tracking without striving, where you just do the tracking part and you see, oh, I see during the week, it's easy to make progress. And on weekends is where I spend too much, or I consume too many calories, or, for example. So just the tracking side, it gets you into the mode of it, and it gives you all kinds of useful information you can actually use to make that change when you do.
I love that. And I love how you are comparing it, not because I have always believed that with regards to finances, just start by tracking. I don't know if I made the switch to every other thing that I'm working on. That's really cool.
It's helpful because you immediately start evaluating what you're doing when you have to write down what you actually did. And so it makes the changes so much more natural. It's not like you're pushing a rock up a hill anymore. It's like, oh, this is what I have to do to make this work. Oh, okay.
How quickly do you notice those changes happening? Like, is it almost real time, like as you're writing them down, or how does that work? I'm just so curious.
Oh, yeah, right away. I use YNAB to track purchases. And as soon as I started doing that, you start buying things differently. You think like, am I really going to enter $81 for a restaurant meal? Like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to confront the reality of that. So you don't do it. And it just changes the incentives.
What else have you tracked other than money, calories, things like that? Like anything else that we or myself could track that you've found has actually made a difference?
I've tracked the time I spend actually working on certain difficult projects, like the Cal Newport's deep work idea. He recommends that you actually keep a scorecard of how much time you spend in this state of undistracted work. You realize how little you were getting done when you weren't tracking. Yes, I actually worked from 10:17 to 12:05 today. Time is one thing that you can track in that way, and it applies to anything.
Yeah, the audience will probably tire of hearing me use this example, but I've found that when I carve out particular time and have no distractions, that it makes such a huge difference. I'm constantly worried about my email inbox, but when I carve out just an hour, which is really not that much of a significant amount of time in the grand scheme of things, I'm able to just bomb through these email responses so quickly and like just get a mental handle. Aside from seeing the number of emails go down, but just that mental handle that previously was overwhelmed. But I didn't realize it was my own stupid brain just being distracted. So what I would sit down for a 3-hour morning to quote, do email, and I would respond to every notification on Facebook or, oh, I'm just going to check this real quick. And it just destroyed my productivity. Whereas if I sat down, put a timer on for an hour, I was able to get, I mean, it's something absurd. It was like 5 or 10x the amount of work done in a third the amount of time. So yeah, I mean, that definitely resonates with me.
Yeah, confronting the actual numbers makes you realize how it really works and how long an hour really is and what you can get done in that time. But you can't do that if you don't really know the numbers. And it's the same with money. Like you can't really control it if you don't know where everything is going.
All right. Question number 4. Ellen, your biggest financial mistake?
So I want to go and hide instead of sharing this one. So my husband and I, and this was entirely my idea, ended up leasing an SUV. And so not only did we lease the SUV, but we did it on a whim following somebody else who was buying one at the dealership. So we did not do any research, and even worse, we didn't negotiate. That just stayed with me for years because we had that car for years.
Wow. So just for fun, you like waltzed into a dealership and said, hey, let's lease a car today? I mean, there was were you in the market or what are we talking about here?
I cannot explain. That's why I want to go hide in a hole somewhere because it's so embarrassing. And I think that it was a good indication for me of I was working crazy hours and I don't think that I had the mental ability to make good personal decisions because I was spending all my mental energy at work. And that was enough of a lesson that I have thankfully not done something that stupid ever again.
Sounds like you were a victim to convenience.
Sometimes the best lessons are by making the biggest mistakes.
Absolutely. All right, David, your biggest financial mistake?
Just not tracking the dollars. There was a time when I was afraid to look at my bank balance, for example. I don't want to know, and it's just the worst thing to be afraid of the reality of the numbers. So yeah, just not tracking income and outgo was it.
Is there any advice? So this is question number 5. Is there any advice that you would give your younger self?
Well, to do exactly that, just to start right from the beginning. I guess maybe it would be read Mr. Money Mustache's blog at 18 years old. That would have been great advice if it were possible at the time. But just to know the numbers and to track them.
And Helene, for yourself?
So something that we know when we're kids is that we can trust our gut. But school tells us to think with our head, and Hollywood would tell you to think with your heart. But every time I have listened to my gut, it has led me in the right direction. And any time I have not listened to my gut, I have lived to regret it. So that would be what I would love to not lose, is the focus on listening to my intuition.
Yeah, gut feeling, that is something that I rely on in my own life to such a significant degree. It's almost, I can't describe it. It's funny, I would consider myself a fairly rational person of late. And Jonathan, you could certainly jump into this. We talk about my gut feeling and quite often here, just amongst ourselves. It just matters. And somehow or another, you can't explain it. But these gut feelings, you really need to pay attention to them in life.
All right, now we do have a bonus question for you. And let me set the stage with this. This is kind of one of these interesting questions. We spend a lot of time talking about not buying stuff, like resisting, spending less, focusing on value. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we recognize that all of us do purchase stuff. We make purchases. And this last question is just to highlight a purchase that you made over the last year. And it can be from Amazon if that fits, or anywhere else. So David, your favorite purchase over the last year?
That's a good question. My favorite purchase over the last year has been ordering really good, freshly roasted coffee from a roaster. It's a little bit indulgent, so I don't do it very often, but it was worthwhile. Yeah.
And Helene?
I ended up buying a set of lights for the YouTube channel. So it was, probably the most significant purchase I've made on Amazon in quite a while.
Oh, wow. That sounds cool. I'd love to get more information on that, but that's really exciting.
Don't give him ideas. Don't give him ideas. Jonathan's a gadget guy. So, his eyes light up when he hears any kind of gadget.
All right. Well, David and Helene, I'm sure that there are people listening to this, honestly, that are hearing about your blogs for the first time and are thinking to themselves, I would love to find out a little bit more about what they've been doing. And then perhaps there's other people that have been longtime readers of your platforms that are getting a chance to kind of interact with you in a different way. David, what's the best way for someone to connect with you or reach you if they have additional questions?
Just go to Raptitude.com. There's a contact form there if you want to send me an email. Or you can find me on Twitter at David D. Kane.
I know that one of the things that you've built over the last couple of years is Camp Calm, right?
Yeah. I run a entry-level meditation course conducted mainly through email a couple of times a year. It's called Camp Calm. We're starting up another season in March. So you can go to campcalm.com for more info on that.
Helene, what's the best way for someone to reach you?
Definitely the primary would be freetopursue.com. That's the blog. And then I am relatively active on Twitter. So at freepursue.
And tell us about your YouTube channel. If someone wants to check out the content you're building, how can they find it?
It will be, the channel is secured, so it's going to be free to pursue.
Perfect. Well, David and Helene, thank you so much for coming on the show today. This has been an incredible conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was fun.
You know, Brad, it was really remarkable. There's so many different topics that we hit on here. This idea of self-control, hedonic adaptation, stretching your comfort zone. Honestly, none of these make sense all by themselves. It's when you put them into the Venn diagram, you realize that this is a superpower. And I was unbelievably excited with how the conversation came together.
Yeah, you and me both. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and I have to say it was one of the episodes I was most excited, but also most nervous about. Just because, not because it would be difficult or nerve-wracking to speak with them. Quite the contrary. There's so much information that they published, and I just wanted to talk to them about everything. And this conversation could have went for 10 or 20 hours, but they just gave us so much information, so many nuggets, and I really can't wait to chat about it on the Friday Roundup. So yeah, this should be a lot of fun.
All right, my friends, if you've been getting value from the show, getting value from the episodes, take 1 second, press the subscribe button on the platform that you're listening to this on. It just lets the providers know that you're getting value from the episodes. You want to be there when we produce additional content. And if you want to support us directly in what we're doing here at Choose FI, here are 4 easy ways. 1, leave us an iTunes review. If you want to do that, just go to choosefi.com/iTunes. 2, use our page to sign up for travel credit cards. If you want to travel the world with miles and points instead of your hard-earned dollars, then just go to choosefi.com/cards and get started today. 3, if you're working on the milestones of FI, set up a personal capital account to track your progress and use our affiliate link. It's completely free, and just go to choosefi.com/PC. P as in Paul, C as in cat. And 4, and most importantly, find your friends, coworkers, and family members who might be open to this message and tell them about the podcast. Have them start with episode 38, The Why of FI, and right behind that, have them go listen to episode 21, The Pillars of FI. It is a fantastic starting place. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to Choose FI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.